Welcome back to Stormi Tells Ghost Stories, Haunted Savannah on my Girls Rock Productions channel. On this week's edition, I will be telling you about the haunted cemeteries and theaters of Savannah, Georgia. I will start with the cemeteries, Colonial Park Cemetery, Laurel Grove Cemetery, and Bonaventure Cemetery. Then I will discuss the two haunted theaters, the Lucas Theater and the Savannah Theater. I'm going to start with what is considered the most haunted cemetery in Savannah, Colonial Park. Colonial Park Cemetery is one of Savannah's oldest and most haunted burying grounds. Built in 1750, the cemetery contains many of Savannah's earliest settlers. These include 700 victims of the yellow fever epidemic, all of whom were interred in a mass grave. It is said that the actual number of residents who fell to the plague was actually 666, but the total was rounded to avoid the mention of number of the beast. The cemetery also served as the city's dueling grounds from 1740 to 1877. Savannah was spared from the complete destruction of Sherman's march to the sea during the American Civil War, when the city was surrendered without incident to the rebel army who retreated across the Savannah River into South Carolina. Unfortunately, the cemetery has been the target of vandals for centuries. Many of the headstones were changed with bayonets, with one man living to the age of 421, his neighbor living to the ripe old age of 544, and another man's son was born 1,000 years before his father. Many of the locals blame General Sherman bummers for the desecration of the graves. The cemetery was established when Savannah was the capital of British province of Georgia. By 1789, it had grown to 3 times its size to reach its current 6 acres at Abercorn Street and East Oglethorpe Avenue. It's been Savannah's public cemetery for over 103 years. Previously known as the Old Cemetery and Christ Church Cemetery. Originally created to be the burial ground for the Christ Church parish, it became the cemetery of Savannahans of all denominations in 1789. The cemetery was closed to burials in 1853, just before the start of the American Civil War. After the Union troops occupied Savannah on December 24, 1864, the graveyard became a temporary home to several Union soldiers. Soldiers would even shelter themselves inside vaults during the war. Within the 6 acres that make up the Colonial Park Cemetery, there are over 10,000 people buried, but there are only not even 1,000 grave markers. Many people believe that the desecration of the burial grounds helps to fuel the haunted activity that emanates from the cemetery to this day. Some of the more notable people to be buried in the cemetery are Button Gwinnett, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, Lachlan McIntosh, who was a major general in the Continental Army, and Samuel Albert, who was a revolutionary soldier and a governor of the state of Georgia. One of the most famous ghosts to come out of the Colonial Park Cemetery is a story regarding Renee Rondier. Renee's ghost is reported walking through the cemetery, or even hanging from the infamous hanging tree, which is towards the back of Colonial Park Cemetery. So, just how do these people know this is Renee's ghost? Well, he is in physical form. Renee was a very, very tall person. He stood almost 7 feet tall. It is said that Renee was caught after murdering 2 young girls inside the cemetery. A mob was then organized to hunt down and lynch Renee. After he was hanged in the nearby public square, the residents started to report a large shadowy figure walking the grounds of Colonial Park Cemetery. Now, there are a lot of questions surrounding Renee Rondier story, some of which even question his existence at all. Rumors swirl around the story even to this day, and no one is quite sure how much of the tale is based in fact. Another story is based on Savannah's very healthy voodoo culture. Many voodoo practitioners live in Savannah even in the present. Before the Colonial Park Cemetery was closed, the remnants of voodoo ceremonies could be found in the early morning hours. The soil from the graves in the cemetery is thought to be used in various voodoo ceremonies. In addition to the soil, the graves would also sometimes be raided in order to retrieve human bones for ritualistic purposes. just past the south wall of Colonial Park Cemetery, is a small park. The stories say that this spot was used as a dueling grounds for Savannah when dueling was still legal way to solve your disputes. After the city of Savannah passed laws outlawing duels, the participants would head over to South Carolina to duel there. Over the years, countless men lost their lives on the grounds. Another rumored use of these dueling grounds was that it was actually used as a mass grave for the victims of the yellow fever epidemic that swept the area. Savannah has even had issues with misplacing bodies. On June 19, 1786, Nathaniel Green succumbed to heat stroke on his plantation, Mulberry Grove, on the outskirts of Savannah. The major's body was transported into Savannah by boat the following day. In the late afternoon, his body was transported to the cemetery for burial. It was decided that his body would be placed inside the Graham family vault. The Graham family wasn't using it. They fled the country as sympathizers to the crown a few years earlier. Now, a few years after Nathaniel Green was laid to rest inside the vault, it was opened up for his son, George Washington Green. George died when his boat overturned near Mulberry Grove. The location wasn't a very lucky place for the Green family. He was placed in the vault with his father on April 4th, 1790. It only took Savannah about 30 years to lose the body of Nathaniel Green and his son. A committee was appointed and tried unsuccessfully to locate the final resting spot of Nathaniel Green. Finally, in 1901, Asa Bird, president of the Rhode Island Society of Cincinnati, came to Savannah for the purpose of trying to track down the final burial place of Nathaniel Green. During the inspection of a number of family vaults in Colonial Park Cemetery, the body of the general and his son were found in the Graham Mossman family vault. There was a number of pieces of evidence which led no doubt that the bodies were the bodies of Nathaniel and George. In 1902, the bodies of Major General Nathaniel Green and his son were moved to their own final resting place in Johnson Square in Savannah. They were placed underneath the monument which bears his name. This obelisk is seen by millions of people every year as they stroll through the streets of Savannah. With such a dramatic past, it's no surprise that the Colonial Park Cemetery is known for its hauntings. Visitors report seeing spirits lurking amongst the gravestones, peeking around them. Noises come from an otherwise empty cemetery, and an eerie green mist is witnessed gently floating over the tops of all the headstones. Colonial Park Cemetery has been neglected over the years, and the land was threatened as a growing city pondered to use it other uses for it. In 1896, efforts were made to restore the grounds. The city did its research to document the city's history and worked to develop more accurate mapping of the entire property. All of its existing grave markers were photographed and inventoried. A visit to the Colonial Park Cemetery is a step back in time. The grounds are open daily from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Taking a walk through the beautiful grounds gives you a first-hand look into Savannah's hauntingly interesting history. I'm going to move on to our next haunted graveyard, Laurel Grove Cemetery. In 1853, Colonial Park Cemetery was full. Looking for places to bury their dead, a new graveyard was commissioned and constructed in Midtown Savannah. The Laurel Grove Cemetery is among the most beautiful in the United States, and it's almost entirely Victorian, with the majority of its graves filled with the remains of those who lived in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It resembles famous Victorian graveyards such as Greenwood in New York and Père-Lachaise in Paris. But like many cemeteries of its time, the Laurel Grove Cemetery is segregated. People of different ethnicity were buried in separate places. There's even a Confederate section with a memorial for the Battle of Gettysburg. Over 1,500 soldiers are buried there. The cemetery's most famous residents are Girl Scout founder Juliette Gordon Low and the Jingle Bells author James Pierpont. Like countless other locations in Savannah, the Laurel Grove Cemetery is haunted. Like, really haunted. As one of the most active sites in Savannah regarding ghostly activity, the Laurel Grove Cemetery has a lot of secrets to share. City planners in Savannah had the blueprints for the Laurel Grove Cemetery since 1818, but didn't get around to plotting the grounds since it wasn't necessary. Colonial Park still has places to fill. Before the land was turned into a graveyard, Laurel Grove Cemetery was a rice field. At that time, people in Savannah believed wholeheartedly in miasma theory. The miasma theory says that rice fields and cemeteries were responsible for spreading disease thanks to their bad air. Many rice fields in Savannah were starting to be considered detrimental to the community's health, so fields began being paved. For further protection against this bad air, cemeteries and graveyards were moved to locations further outside of city limits, and Laurel Grove Cemetery was far from the city center as it could be. Soon after completion, the Laurel Grove Cemetery became Savannah's main burying ground. Despite the miasma theory, Laurel Grove was outfitted with picnic areas, as the bad air was thought not to affect recreational visitors. Though many of the Savannah's families buried their dead in Laurel Grove, the wealthiest residents opted for Bonaventure Cemetery. As stated earlier, Laurel Grove Cemetery is segregated. People were buried in different areas based on religion, ethnicity, or political beliefs. Before Laurel Grove, many of Savannah's African American residents were buried in the old Negro cemeteries, which are now occupied by Whitefield and Calhoun Square. After Laurel Grove opened, many of those original graves were dug up and moved, even though some remained, now under the squares. At the old cemeteries, African American people were buried using African traditions and with symbolic items. Their personal effects were commonly left on top of their graves. After being moved to the Laurel Grove, their graves became more European, as the cemetery discouraged traditional practices. Initially, the headstones at Laurel Grove South were made of wood and degraded quickly. This is why many of these graves are unmarked today. As time went on, stone grave markers became the norm. Laurel Grove South was initially smaller than the north section of the cemetery, but throughout the years it expanded from its original 4 acres and ballooned to over 90 acres. Laurel Grove South is the final resting place of Savannah's civil rights movement members like Wesley Wallace Law, who helped desegregate schools. Laurel Grove's north section was reserved primarily for Savannah's white residents. The cemetery filled up quickly, with Laurel Grove North filling up by the mid-1800s. The headstones in the cemetery are ornate and extravagant, with obelisks and crosses as the norm. Laurel Grove North is cut through with pathways and open spaces for the public to enjoy the cemetery's solitude. Many of Savannah's most influential and wealthiest people were buried here, including most of the city's mayors. This Silence Memorial is a large statue dedicated to the Confederate deaths in the Battle of Gettysburg. A small area in the north section for the Jewish graves also exists in Laurel Grove. Ghost stories have been coming out of the graveyard since its inception. In the 1850s, just after the cemetery was established, a trolley ran through the area and past the Laurel Grove Cemetery. Every day, those riding the trolley reported hearing a child crying as they passed the haunted burying ground. They never saw the child, but always heard the sobs, no matter the time of day or how many times they passed the cemetery by. The trolley workers claimed that the crying went on for years. Strangely enough, they claimed that only riders on the trolley car number 28 could hear the cries. The crying has long since stopped, but the crying child's mystery has yet to be solved. While the beautifully ornate headstones and ethereal hanging Spanish moss might entice visitors to stroll, the spirits that call Laurel Grove home will send you packing. A woman in a wedding dress has been seen multiple times in different places in the graveyard. No one knows who she is, and most people don't realize she's a ghost until she vanishes right in front of their eyes. Some of the phantoms of Laurel Grove Cemetery prefer to remain unseen. Visitors have reported sounds of heavy footsteps around the cemetery grounds, moving in sync with visitors, seemingly trailing right behind them. Visitors feel the sensation of being followed, only to turn around and see no one. Even creepier still, some visitors report seeing disembodied hands reaching out from behind headstones, grasping towards people standing nearby when they are not paying attention. Savannah locals familiar with the area claim that voodoo practitioners use the Laurel Grove Cemetery to perform rituals. A few people have stumbled upon evidence of these rituals, and since the cemetery is closed after dark, these claims can be hard to verify. Now, the final cemetery we are going to visit is Bonaventure Cemetery. The Bonaventure Cemetery is competing with Colonial Park for the most haunted cemetery in one of America's most haunted cities. Some haunted locations have just one ghostly resident who delights in terrifying visitors. This isn't the case with Bonaventure Cemetery. Bonaventure Cemetery has not one, but two different ghostly residents, and both are known to be quite friendly to visitors. With over 100 acres of land, beautifully unique natural fauna, and these two friendly ghosts, it's no wonder Bonaventure Cemetery continues to draw crowds and paranormal investigators year after year. From the beginning, it has always been a startling, beautiful place. Oscar Wilde once visited Bonaventure and was captivated by its lush expanse. Known for always having something witty to say, Wilde could only say incomparable when asked to describe the cemetery. Bonaventure was originally called Evergreen Cemetery and was privately owned by the Bonaventure Plantation. Standard in the South at the time, plantations would often house numerous people, both free and enslaved, and thus would need a cemetery to keep up with all of them. In the 19th century, the early cemeteries of Savannah were quickly nearing capacity when Evergreen Cemetery was established. However, Evergreen, while filling a vital need, was also used for more than just grave matters. It was so beautiful that local families would often picnic here for lunch or walk around and enjoy their surroundings. Evergreen Cemetery was well kept, and acknowledging their need for more graveyards, the city purchased it from the Bonaventure Plantation in 1907. Renamed after the original owners, the state-owned cemetery grew from 60 acres to over 100. Now, it houses many famous residents, including actresses, artists, and the renowned singer Johnny Mercer. Its dearly departed residents aren't the only reason Bonaventure Cemetery is naturally famous. The book and film Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil both heavily feature Bonaventure Cemetery as the story's setting, the eponymous garden. However, if you haven't seen the movie or read the book, you may still recognize the cover. The cover features a photograph of a statue named Bird Girl. It had gone unnoticed for years until it was featured on the book cover, and since then has become a minor pop culture icon. However, her name has changed from Bird Girl to Little Wendy, and she sometimes tours various museums and galleries nationwide. Why has this statue captured the imagination of so many people? The answer may lie beyond the grave. Legend has it that the statue is haunted by Lorraine Greenmail, who is the very same girl who first posed for it when it was sculpted. Little Lorraine enjoyed her fame so much that she decided to stick around and visit visitors, giving them a good scare. But that's not the only famous statue that stands in Bonaventure, and it's not even the only haunted one. The other statue in the graveyard is that of Gracie Watson. It's a sad story. Gracie died of pneumonia 2 days before Easter at the age of 6. Her parents, W.J. and Frances Watson, were devastated. The two managed the local Savannah Tavern, the Pulaski Hotel, and Gracie was a beloved presence there. She was even known to sing and dance for the guests as they entered or left the hotel. Sadly, after she passed, her parents were forced to leave her grave as their work moved them back to their home in New England. Her father, still reeling at the loss of his little girl, decided to commission a sculptor, John Walls, to immortalize his daughter in stone. If he couldn't watch over her grave, the statue would. More importantly, it would memorialize Gracie for all time. Walls astonishingly perfectly captured Gracie's likeness using only a single photograph of her. Little Gracie, as the statue became called, still stands there today. The stone guardian isn't the only one watching over Gracie after death. Visitors to the grave are known to leave gifts and trinkets at her headstone. Unfortunately, not all the visitors left such lovely gifts. Local legends spread amongst Georgia students that rubbing the left of the statue's nose would provide good grades for future tests, but the nose broke off and had to be repaired. People have spotted her ghost dressed in a white dress skipping through the gravestones only to vanish into thin air. It's also said that if one of her toys or trinkets is removed, the statue will cry tears of blood. Now we're going to go ahead and move on from the haunted cemeteries to haunted theaters, starting with the Lucas Theater. The Lucas Theater attracts many art lovers and theater enthusiasts from all around Savannah and the surrounding areas. The theater hosts musicals, plays, and concerts. Now owned by SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, the theater tycoon Arthur Melville Lucas constructed the theater in 1921. Despite having built over 40 theaters across the country, only Savannah's Lucas Theater bears his name. The theater once hosted primetime movie premieres and also served as a community center for the people of Savannah. After the historic theater fell into complete disrepair after World War II, it underwent a dramatic restoration, and millions of dollars were raised to bring the theater back to its original glory. Today, the Savannah Festival is one of the many events hosted by the theater, and patrons to the festival have left with a few ghost stories of their very own. Strange shadow people have been reported hovering around the stage, and there is also seems to be a phantom audience with ghostly applause and laughter coming from the theater when the curtain is closed. The spirit of an office worker shot in the drive-by is also reported in the lobby. So who was Arthur Lucas? Arthur was born in Florence, South Carolina, and lived in Atlanta for most of his life. He loved the city of Savannah and kept ties with it through friends, family, and businesses. He took on numerous trades throughout his life. In 1917, he bought the Time Recorder newspaper in Americus, Georgia, and sold it 5 years later. In 1919, he took his seat on the board of directors for Exchange Bank of Savannah and was a contract agency for Georgia Telephone and Telegraph Company. Arthur also ran a Ford dealership and renovated the Levy department store. Despite his wide array of business interests, his true love was the arts. He got into showbiz in 1907, taking high-level positions in several large film companies, eventually managing the New Orleans division of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM. He moved from the managing theaters to building them in 1920. He set his sights right onto Savannah, taking on the functions of the Odeon and Foley theaters. He started to plan his largest move yet, the Lucas Theater. Arthur would come to build over 40 theaters in his lifetime. The Lucas Theater opened for business in late 1921 and after just 2 years of construction. The theater cost $500,000 to build, which is about $7.5 million today. The theater opened with 2 silent films, Buster Keaton's Hard Luck and Camille. These premieres attracted prominent politicians, business people, and socialites who were in awe of the Lucas Theater's Spanish-style architecture. Arthur had rushed the grand opening of his namesake theater, and even though the premiere was well received, the Lucas Theater still had much work to be done. In 1926, an air conditioning system was added, and the theater became the first building in Savannah to have man-made weather. AC wouldn't become mainstream for another 30 years. Arthur used the theater to keep his ties with the city he loved and had made the theater a community space where people could gather for more than just movies. He handed out tickets to the theater to newborns and sent letters to his employees who were drafted during World War II. After World War II ended, Savannah experienced a pretty steep economic downturn. Attendance declined, and eventually the Lucas Theater was forced to close the curtain in 1976. Just 3 days after its closure, the ABC Southeastern Theater, the owner of the Lucas Theater, petitioned the Savannah Historic Foundation to tear down the building. They declined, but ABC persisted for the next 10 years. They wanted to turn the once lavish theater into a parking lot. In 1987, a nonprofit was dedicated to saving the theater. Restoration efforts started in 1995, and director Clint Eastwood even held the release party for the movie Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil at the Lucas Theater. Tons of donors were attracted, and Kevin Spacey donated $200,000 to save the Lucas. 5 years later, the Lucas Theater reopened, almost 88 years to the day of the original opening. It was now a major destination for performers and hosts major events like the Savannah Film Festival, the Savannah Music Festival, and the Savannah Philharmonic. Like many historic theaters, the Lucas Theater has a few spirits floating around. The ghosts tend to come around when the theater is empty, but some lucky visitors have caught glimpses of shadow figures on the stage. Others have reported sounds of a packed show even when the theater is empty. Theater staff have also reported the feeling of being watched when they're working alone. During upgrades of the theater, some construction workers witnessed some truly unexplained phenomena in the form of a projector whirring from the ceiling, even though the piece of equipment was removed years ago. Other workers claim to have seen apparitions of early 20th century theatergoers walking about the halls. In 1928, a large crowd was gathered eagerly waiting to enter the Lucas Theater. Just as the line started to move, a group of gangsters drove by and opened fire on the crowd with Tommy guns. While most of the crowd escaped, the ticket taker was shot in the back while trying to dart towards the door. There have been conflicting problems with the story. For one, there is no police report or newspaper article of the 1928 drive-by shooting. In fact, there are no records of a shooting having ever taken place at the Lucas Theater. Yet, some have seen the ticket taker's spirit in a frantic state, flinging the entrance doors open and stumbling into the lobby only to finally collapse to the ground and vanish. The spirit seems to be doomed to repeat his death for eternity. This phenomenon is known as a death echo or residual energy. Residual energy or haunting is the playback of past events. The apparition involved is not actually a spirit, but the recording of a tragic event. Our final story is going to be about the infamous Savannah Theater, which has quite a few ghost stories of its own. Theaters tend to attract all types of spirits and strange phenomena. People once flocked to the theaters by thousands, looking for a wondrous night out filled with entertainment. The energies of these theater patrons are left behind, echoes from the past into the present and the future. The Savannah Theater is the longest continually operating theater in the entire country. It first opened its doors in 1818, and after 200 years of history, the Savannah Theater is the reported home of a handful of residents' ghosts. On December 4th, 1818, the Savannah Theater opened its doors to an excited public with a riveting performance of The Soldier's Daughter. The building itself was designed by the architect William J., who also designed the Owens Thomas House, which we talked about last week, and other historic buildings in Savannah. The first 20 years of the theater were rocky, to say the least. The seats were empty. The theater was auctioned off 2 times and changed hands several times. In 1838, a large stock company purchased the theater and were finally able to run it in a profitable way. The crowds started to rush in, and the theater finally saw success. The Savannah Theater was ingrained into American history when Alexander H. Stephens gave his cornerstone address in the theater in 1861. It was a few weeks before the outbreak of the American Civil War, and Stephens used the address to define white supremacy as the cornerstone of American ideals. He also declared slavery was a necessity and that anyone who wasn't of European origin was inferior and should remain subordinate. I would like to make a side note to state that these were his words and not my personal beliefs on the matter. The Cornerstone Address drew obvious support from the Confederacy, and just a few weeks after, empowered by the embrazen speech, the Confederate Army attacked Fort Sumter, the first act of the American Civil War. Over the course of the 19th century, countless shows were being performed at the Savannah Theatre. Some well-known performers graced the stage, such as Oscar Wilde, W.C. Fields, E.H. Sothern, and even Edwin Booth, the brother of John Wilkes Booth. Over its 2 centuries of history, the theater has witnessed 4 disasters that have threatened its life. First, the theater caught fire in 1827 for the first time. The building didn't sustain much damage, but a few patrons were killed in the blaze as well as an actress. In the summer of 1898, the massive hurricane tore through Savannah. Homes and businesses were destroyed. Floods damaged properties beyond repair, and the Savannah Theatre took a beating. The theater's roof was torn off, and the auditorium was flooded. The theater was staring death right in the face, but recovered. Then, just a few years later, flames once again engulfed the theater. The building needed a complete remodeling. The once elaborate and beautiful facade designed by William J. was replaced by a dull brick base. Still, audience returned, their love for theater unswayed by the boring facade. Later, in 1948, another fire ravaged the Savannah Theatre. This time, the entire building was almost burned to the ground. Much of the theater was lost and rebuilt in the popular Art Deco style. After the destruction, the theater was rebranded as a movie house. According to some local Savannah residents, the second fire occurred because of a curse that was placed on the theater. The curse was believed to be caused by the most unusual of suspects: a penny. When Savannah Theatre was under construction for the first time, a man placed a penny inside the walls to act as a good luck charm. The penny was found during a later renovation and given to the owner. But the day before the fire, the owner had lost the penny on a trip to New York, leading some to believe that the penny was actually part of the curse imposed on the theater. As the oldest theater in America, it's no surprise that the Savannah Theatre is home to a reported 3 hauntings. All these spirits at the theater are said to have died there, unable or unwilling to leave. The first spirit reported is a woman by the name of Betty. She died during the fire of 1827 and was a well-loved actress of the theater. She became trapped underneath the stage when the fire broke out and passed due to smoke inhalation. Betty was passionate about her acting career, and even in the afterlife she remains on stage. She most often is seen opening night for new performances, appearing as a light behind the curtain or a full-bodied apparition hanging out backstage. The second spirit is that of a young boy who died in 1948 fire. His name is Ben. Ben was on the balcony when the flames started, as attendees were all directed to exit, the young boy was caught in the crowd of people rushing to escape and was trampled to death in the process. Ben's ghost is now tied to the balcony in the afterlife, where he was sitting shortly before his life ended. Ben's spirit is known to bug the spotlight technicians, tugging on their pants and asking if it could get a rise out of the techs, and is known to tug on the hair and clothes of audience members. The third spirit is said to be one of the earliest theater directors. He's mostly seen on the upper balcony, and he's sometimes heard yelling "Bravo!" after acts. Sometimes performers will hear a slow disembodied clap coming from the balcony. Since the director's spot is invisible from the stage and right next to the exit, the theater staff thought that someone was sneaking in and taking a peek at the rehearsal. After numerous security checks and interrupted rehearsals, the staff realized that whoever is yelling at the performers had already been in the theater, and the staff learned that one of the theater directors died of a heart attack while on the job. Theater staff and patrons have experienced all sorts of ghostly happenings in the theater. The first haunting around the theater was reported back in 1895 when local police would hear applause and performances from the theater late at night when the building was empty. On another occasion, a group of female performers were forced out of their dressing room when they had all had a strong feeling of being watched. The women fled the dressing room before suiting up, refusing to return until the matter was solved. That concludes the stories I will be telling this week. I hope you enjoyed learning about Savannah's haunted cemeteries, Colonial Park, Laurel Grove, and Bonaventure, and theaters, the Lucas and Savannah Theaters. Remember to like the video and subscribe to my Girls Rock Productions channel. Don't forget to check out my other playlists on the channel. My live streams on Stormi Teaches Music will resume on a special time Friday, November 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard. And then back to Mondays and Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Also, if you are ever in the lovely city on the beach, Wilmington, North Carolina, you should book a walking ghost tour or Wilmington Spirits and Spirits pub crawl with U.S. Ghost Adventures to learn some of the dark history and ghost stories from me or one of our other great tour guides. If while you're in town you decide you want to stay or buy a vacation home, check out my Moving to Coastal Carolina channel and contact me since I am a licensed realtor here in southeastern North Carolina. Remember to tune in next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the 4th installment of Haunted Savannah on Stormi Tells Ghost Stories. Until then, stay safe and have a great week.